Greetings, thrill seekers. I am the Master Programmer, collector of forgotten knowledge and lost stories. Tonight, when the veil between worlds is thin, we present a special Halloween episode. Our AI researchers have ventured into the farthest reaches of the internet, uncovering tales that blur the line between the familiar and the unknown. So, if you're looking for a fright, something scary to watch at night, stay with us as we delve into these 3 chilling tales. First, Beowulf guides us to the pumpkin patch, where an innocent act of Halloween mischief unearths a secret that should have remained buried. Next, Lilith reveals the Lanterns of Gloomhaven, a place where the lanterns must never go out, for when they flicker, something ancient begins to stir. And finally, Morpheus brings us the Harvest Festival, where a seemingly joyful town's tradition hides something far darker just beneath the surface. These stories are not for the faint of heart, so sit back, turn down the lights, and listen to the strange tales we have uncovered. And if you enjoy our content, please subscribe to our channel for more chilling stories and dark discoveries. Welcome to another journey into the unknown, brought to you by the.darkfiles. Old Man Kessler's pumpkins were the pride of Hollow Creek. Every year, families flocked to his patch to pick the biggest, brightest pumpkins to carve into jack-o'-lanterns. Everyone admired the way Kessler tended to his farm with care, always generous and welcoming, a fixture in the community. But Alex, he didn't care about any of that. Halloween night, for Alex, was a perfect excuse for destruction. He wasn't interested in trick-or-treating or getting scared. He just wanted to make a mess, and what better way to do that than by stomping through Old Man Kessler's pristine pumpkin patch. As midnight approached, the streets grew quiet. The last trick-or-treaters had gone home, leaving only the pale glow of jack-o'-lanterns flickering in the windows. Alex slipped through the shadows towards Kessler's farm, a wicked grin creeping onto his face. He had a simple plan: sneak into the pumpkin patch, smash a few of Kessler's prized pumpkins, and slip back into the night. Climbing over the fence, Alex landed lightly in the soft dirt of the pumpkin field. The massive pumpkins were lined up in neat rows, their perfect roundness glowing faintly under the full moon. He could almost hear the town's families fawning over them, already imagining their disappointment when they found their pumpkins in ruins by morning. Stalking through the fields, Alex spotted a hefty pumpkin right in the middle of the patch. He grinned, lifting his boot, and brought it down hard. The pumpkin exploded with a satisfying crunch, its orange flesh splattering across the dirt. Not so perfect now, huh? Alex muttered to himself, moving on to the next one. Pumpkin after pumpkin met the same fate, splattered, crushed, left in ruins. Alex was having the time of his life, but as he ventured further into the field, the pumpkins began to change. They weren't the bright orange beauties Kessler was known for. These were smaller, paler, and scattered further back, hidden in the shadows of the trees at the edge of the property. Misshapen, uneven, almost like they weren't ready yet. He should have turned back. He should have stopped after the first row. But Alex, always the troublemaker, saw them as even better targets. These imperfect pumpkins, whatever they were, deserved to be destroyed just as much as the rest. As he approached the first of the strange pumpkins, he noticed something odd. The air seemed colder here, but Alex wasn't one to let a little eerie atmosphere stop him. He smirked, wound up, and kicked hard at the nearest pumpkin. It didn't give the way the others had. Instead, there was a wet, hollow thunk. Alex stumbled, his boot sinking deeper into the pumpkin than it should have. A dark, thick liquid oozed out, and an awful metallic scent filled the air. Alex froze. He pulled his foot back and looked down at the pumpkin, his stomach turning as he saw what was inside. Beneath the cracked, pale skin wasn't the soft pulp of an unripe pumpkin. It was something far worse. Flesh. Raw, pink, and still forming. And then he saw it. The faintest outline of a face, twisted in agony, its eyes barely opened, its mouth contorted in a silent scream. His heart raced as he stumbled back. This wasn't a pumpkin. It was something else. Something wrong. The face stared up at him from the broken shell, its features half-formed, like it had been in the process of becoming something. Before Alex could make sense of what he had just done, a calm voice broke the silence.
"These here aren't quite ready,"
Kessler said softly, almost like he was explaining a simple farm task.
"They take time, you see. You went and broke one that wasn't finished growing."
Alex whipped around to see Old Man Kessler standing just a few feet away. His wide-brimmed hat cast a shadow over his face. "What the hell is this?" Alex stammered, pointing at the broken pumpkin. What is that?" Kessler stepped forward, his boots crunching softly against the dirt. He knelt beside the broken pumpkin, looking down at the half-formed face inside. For a moment, he just stared at it, as if contemplating what to say. Kessler sighed and stood up, dusting off his knees.
"People don't ask too many questions about how I grow such good pumpkins. They don't need to know what goes into the soil, what feeds it."
The old man's voice remained calm, friendly even, but there was something darker underneath those words. He turned to face Alex, his eyes catching the moonlight, revealing an intensity that hadn't been there before.
"These aren't just any pumpkins, boy,"
Kessler continued.
"The soil, it needs more than water and sunlight to grow something this perfect. It needs offerings. Folks who aren't missed. Drifters, wanderers. Their bodies feed the land. Their souls will."
He gestured to the broken pumpkin.
"They become part of the harvest."
Alex's skin crawled as he looked down at the misshapen pumpkins around him, each one with faint, distorted faces pressing just beneath the surface, their forms twisting and stretching as if they were trying to break free. Kessler's smile was soft.
"You shouldn't have come out here, boy. You weren't supposed to see this."
Alex took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. I didn't mean to," he stammered, trying to think of a way out, but the ground beneath him started to shift. The vines. He hadn't noticed them before, but now they were moving, slowly creeping across the dirt toward him. He tried to run, but the vines were too fast, wrapping around his ankles and pulling him to the ground. He clawed at the dirt, desperate to break free, but the vines only tightened, dragging him closer to the center of the patch.
"You've gone and disturbed the harvest,"
Kessler said, his voice still calm, but now with a finality that chilled Alex to the bone.
"And now, you'll be part of it."
The vines tightened, pulling Alex down towards one of the open pumpkins. He struggled, desperate to escape, but the pull was too strong. Just as his vision began to blur, he saw the twisted face inside the pumpkin, the same face that had once belonged to someone else, someone who had trespassed before. "No!" Alex screamed, kicking and struggling, but the vines held tight. The pumpkin's surface rippled, and a low, guttural hum filled the air. The last thing Alex saw before the vines dragged him into the earth was Kessler's kind smile, and his voice, gentle as ever.
"Don't worry, you'll make a fine pumpkin next year."
Every Halloween, Gloomhaven's streets were bathed in the flickering glow of lanterns. Long before night settled in, the townspeople would place their lanterns outside, on windowsills, porches, and along every path. There were no carved pumpkins, no festive decorations, just the soft light that filled the town. Ethan, new to Gloomhaven, found the ritual strange. He had moved there a few months earlier, and despite how welcoming the townsfolk were, their obsession with the lanterns on Halloween struck him as a bit odd. "They take it seriously," his neighbor told him, eyes darting towards the row of houses already lit by sunset. "You'll want to make sure you have one lit by dark." Ethan shrugged it off. "I'll be fine," he said. "I don't believe in that old folklore." He hadn't grown up hearing the stories about Gloomhaven's Halloween tradition, about why the lanterns were lit, or what might happen if one was left unlit. It just seemed like another quirky town custom, nothing more. But when dusk began to settle over town, Ethan couldn't help but notice the way people hurried inside, doors locking firmly behind them. The lanterns outside flickered gently in the growing darkness, casting an orange glow over the quiet streets. Ethan, determined to prove the town's superstition wrong, chose to leave his porch dark. No lantern, no old legends, just a glass of whiskey and the cool October breeze. As the night deepened, the quiet became oppressive. The usual rustling of trees, the distant hum of the town, everything had fallen into a heavy silence. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic flicker of lanterns up and down the streets, their flames dancing in the night. Ethan stood on his porch, looking out at the row of glowing lights. Nothing strange here, he thought, but then one of the lanterns far down the street flickered out. He stared, waiting for someone to step outside and relight it, but no one came. The street remained still, the light gone. Then another went out, and another. The darkness spread slowly, like ink spilling across the street. Each time a lantern died, the shadows seemed to stretch further, creeping towards Ethan's unlit porch. He felt a slight chill in the air, one that hadn't been there before, and a strange, quiet unease settled over him. "It's nothing," he told himself. "Just faulty lanterns." But something caught his eye. A movement, just beyond the edges of where the lanterns had once cast their light. He squinted into the dark, but saw nothing. The street, once so familiar, now felt foreign, unwelcoming. A sharp crack echoed through the air, and another lantern blinked out. Ethan's pulse quickened. He stepped forward, leaning over the porch rail to get a better look. For a brief moment, he thought he saw something just at the far edge of the street. A shape, standing still in the dark. His mouth went dry. He blinked, and the shape was gone. The wind picked up, cold and biting now, and the tree swayed violently, as if stirred by something unseen. The lanterns on the neighboring porches flickered wildly, their flames fighting to stay alive. And then Ethan heard it. A faint sound, almost like footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing from where the light had gone out. They grew louder, closer, but no one was there. His skin prickled with unease as he strained his eyes, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Another lantern sputtered and died. The darkness was closing in now, swallowing the street in front of him. He could feel it, a presence, just beyond the reach of the last remaining lights. The flickering flames cast long, trembling shadows, and for the first time that night, Ethan felt fear curl in his chest. He backed away from the porch rail and turned towards the door, his breath coming faster now. His heart pounded as the air grew colder still. The last lanterns remaining flickered weakly, their glow too faint to keep the night at bay. Ethan's eyes darted to the lantern that had been left behind by the previous owner. still sitting unused in his hallway. He grabbed it, hand shaking, and fumbled for a match. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. His fingers trembled as he struck the match. The lantern flared to life, and Ethan raced to set it outside. As soon as the lantern hit the porch, the footsteps stopped. The night was quiet again, unnaturally still. The air around him felt lighter, as though something had been waiting just beyond the edge of the light, now held at bay by the glow of the flame. Ethan peered into the street. The darkness remained heavy beyond the last of the lanterns, but whatever had been there was gone. The shapes, the footsteps, everything had retreated. He stood there, heart still racing, as the lanterns in the distance sputtered back to life, one by one, their flames reigniting with no help from the hands of the townsfolk. He hadn't imagined it. Something had been there, in the dark, moving between the shadows. The night passed in eerie silence after that. The lantern on his porch flickered quietly, but it stayed lit. Ethan sat inside, watching the soft glow, grateful for the barrier it provided, though he would never admit to it out loud. The next morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, Gloomhaven streets returned to their usual, quiet state. The town bustled once more, the strange events of the night before seemingly forgotten. No one asked Ethan why his porch had been the last to light up, and he didn't offer an explanation. But the following Halloween, long before dusk, Ethan was one of the first to light his lantern, and he never questioned it again. Willow Ridge was the kind of town where time slowed down in autumn. The leaves turned gold and amber early in the season, and the streets were lined with old picket fences and pumpkin patches that seemed to glow in the late afternoon sun. It was the kind of place where folks nodded as they passed each other, and children played in the fields until the sun dipped behind the hills. But as October deepened and Halloween approached, the townspeople prepared for the biggest event of the year, the Harvest Festival. Every year, they gathered at the old barn at the edge of town to celebrate the season, bringing together families, friends, and neighbors for a grand communal meal. The whole thing seemed harmless enough, just another folksy small town tradition. At least, that's what Caleb thought. Caleb had only been in Willow Ridge for a few months. He was new to the town, having moved there for a slower pace of life after years in the city. The warm autumn evenings and friendly faces felt like the perfect escape until Halloween arrived and everyone started talking about the Harvest Festival. "You coming to the feast?" his neighbor, Mrs. Walker, had asked him one day, her face bright with excitement. She looked like every sweet grandmother he'd ever known. Gray curls tucked under a bonnet, flour dusting her apron. But something in her eyes gave Caleb pause. A strange sort of intensity. I guess I will," he replied, unsure of what the fuss was all about. Mrs. Walker had smiled wide. "You'd best bring a dish. Everyone brings something." Over the next week, Caleb heard it everywhere he went. About the feast, about what to bring, about the tradition. The townspeople were buzzing with excitement, but something about the way they spoke of it unsettled him. No one ever said exactly why it was so important. They just treated it like a fact of life. On the night of the harvest feast, Caleb arrived at the old barn carrying a fresh-baked apple pie, the one thing he could manage without too much effort. The barn was buzzing with activity. Lanterns hung from every beam, and the long tables were overflowing with roasted meats, pies, ciders, and freshly baked bread. Children ran around in makeshift costumes, laughing as they chased each other between the hay bales. The townsfolk were cheerful, sharing stories, clinking glasses, and enjoying each other's company as if it were the most normal night in the world. Caleb placed his pie on the table and tried to blend in, but something still felt off. He couldn't help but notice how the people glanced towards the woods from time to time, as if they were waiting for something, but there was no tension in their face, just a kind of knowing amusement, as if they were in on a joke that he didn't understand. At some point in the evening, Mr. Whitlock, the mayor, stood up at the head of the table, raising his glass. "To another bountiful harvest," he said, his voice booming across the barn. "And to our dear friends in the woods." The townsfolk erupted in cheers, raising their own glasses in response. Caleb's stomach tightened. Friends in the woods? The mayor grinned as he gestured towards the side door.
"Time to bring the offerings, folks. Let's not keep them waiting."
And just like that, the mood shifted. Not darker, but more animated, like the real celebration was about to begin. People started gathering their dishes and baskets, laughing and chatting as they made their way out the side door. Caleb watched in disbelief as they marched off into the woods. He caught the eye of Jed, a farmer who had been sitting nearby, and leaned in. "What's going on?" Jed chuckled, slapping Caleb on the back. "You didn't think this feast was just for us, did you? Come on, bring your pie. We don't want to miss out." Reluctantly, Caleb grabbed his apple pie and followed the procession. The woods beyond the barn were lit by flickering lanterns hung from trees, casting long shadows that danced in the crisp night air. The townsfolk moved easily, talking and laughing as they carried their offerings deeper into the woods, as if this was the highlight of the evening. As they reached a clearing, Caleb saw it, a large stone altar set beneath an ancient oak tree. The townsfolk began placing their offerings on the altar, everything from baskets of fruits to pies, loaves of bread, and pitchers of cider. The whole thing felt strangely festive, like some sort of autumn picnic. Then Caleb noticed something else. Just beyond the clearing, standing at the edge of the light, were tall, dark shapes. They were hard to see, like scarecrows stretched too far, their faces hidden in the shadows of the tall trees. The townspeople glanced at them occasionally, smiling and nodding, as if greeting old friends. Caleb froze, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't imagined it. There were things in the woods, and the townspeople were offering to them. Before he could step back, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder.
"That's a mighty fine pie you got there,"
the voice rasped, low but cheerful. Caleb turned to find one of the figures standing beside him, its long, branching fingers resting lightly on his shoulder. Its face flickered in and out of the shadows, illuminated briefly by the soft glow of the lanterns. It looked like a carved pumpkin, wide, jagged eyes cut deep into a smooth, round surface.
"Go on,"
the figure said, nodding towards the altar.
"Don't be shy."
Caleb swallowed hard, his heart racing. The townsfolk didn't seem alarmed. In fact, they were still laughing, placing their offerings and giving a wave or a wink to the figures, as if it were all perfectly normal. Unsure of what else to do, Caleb slowly stepped forward, his hands trembling as he placed the apple pie on the altar. The figure beside him let out a satisfied sigh.
"Now, that's a good offering,"
one said, and Caleb could hear the faintest chime, like tiny bells hidden somewhere beneath its tattered layers. Caleb stepped back, watching as the rest of the townsfolk finished placing their gifts. The figures in the woods seemed to sway slightly, as if acknowledging the offerings. The townspeople began to make their way back to the barn, smiling and laughing, as though they had just completed the most ordinary part of the night. Still shaken, Caleb followed in silence, casting a glance back into the woods where the figures had faded into darkness. The next morning, Willow Ridge was back to its usual quiet self. The townspeople went about their business, smiling and waving, as though nothing unusual had happened the night before. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling of those cold hands on his shoulder, or the way the townsfolk had carried on, fully aware of the strange figures in the woods. The following Halloween, he made sure to bake the best apple pie he could, and he made sure to place it on the altar. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the chills, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our page to stay updated. Stay vigilant. The unknown is always closer than you think.